Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. If you look at the history of blues music, you aren't just hit with incredible sounds. You're hit with an overwhelming avalanche of subgenres. I mean, we're talking desert blues, swamp blues, Piedmont, fife and drum, dirty blues. The list goes on and on. It's honestly enough to make anyone's head spin. So today, we're exploring exactly why music labels create so much confusion and how all this chaos directly impacts both the fans trying to connect with the music and the artists who are really just trying to survive.
To untangle this massive web, we're going to follow a quick roadmap. Section 1, the paradox of labels. 2, the Big Bill Broonzy story. 3, rural roots to urban sounds. 4, gatekeepers and authentic blues. And finally, 5, the cost of categorization. So let's get into Section 1, the paradox of music labels.
There's this brilliant quote from the Cambridge Companion to Blues and Gospel Music that compares studying this world to entering a botanical garden. Now think about that. In a garden, every single leaf and stem gets a specific Latin placard, right? It promises total mastery. But blues music isn't a static plant. Drawing these rigid boxes around a deeply emotional, constantly evolving art form creates this illusion of order, but it actually conceals a massive amount of historical confusion just under the surface. I mean, just look at the early days of this music and you instantly find these wildly creative, frankly kind of absurd nicknames. You've got Gatemouth Brown, Bumblebee Slim, my personal favorite, the Devil's Son-in-Law, Cow Cow Davenport, Blind Lemon Jefferson. You kind of have to smile at the Devil's Son-in-Law, right? But these fantastic names actually prove how chaotic the conventions really were, because artists' names, much like the subgenres themselves, were rarely accurate historical records. They were marketing tools, carefully crafted by the industry to build up a mystique and ultimately just sell more records.
And that brings us to a double meaning that's going to anchor our entire explainer today. The word label actually means two very different things in this context. First, it's the genre tag, right? That descriptive box we force the music into. But secondly, it's the literal record company, the business paying for and marketing that music. And as we'll see, these two definitions feed right into each other, basically trapping the artists right in the middle.
Which takes us to Section 2, the Big Bill Broonzy story.
To really understand this trap, we have to talk about Big Bill Broonzy. This guy was a true musical chameleon who did whatever he had to do to survive in the industry. Back in the 1920s, he was playing country and folk mostly to African-American audiences. But by the 30s and 40s, the market shifted. So he shifted right along with it, adopting this urban R&B sound with a small band. And then, come the 1950s, he pivoted yet again, returning to his traditional acoustic roots to become this global star of the American folk revival. He constantly shapeshifted to fit literally whatever label the decade demanded. But here is the wild part. It wasn't just his musical style that changed. His personal history was actively rewritten to fit a specific marketing label. Broonzy actually claimed to be born in 1893 and said he served in World War I. But census records suggest he was born in 1903, which would make him way too young to serve. So why lie about it? Well, because the market wanted the label of an older, traditional, world-weary bluesman. So he played the game. The sources even note he once gave up the fiddle to become a preacher, but then got roped into a 4-day gig because his wife preemptively spent his $50 violin advance. He really just navigated this chaotic industry by any means necessary.
Moving on to Section 3, rural roots to urban sounds.
PBS highlights a really stark contrast between rural and urban sounds. If you think about rural blues, it was typically a pretty solitary affair, right? You had a single singer, an acoustic guitar, and an irregular, deeply personal rhythm. But urban blues? That shifted the entire paradigm. Now we get electric guitars, full backing bands, and this driving, steady beat. And this wasn't just some random artistic whim, it was a required adaptation to an entirely new way of living. Because geography itself actually forced these entirely new genre labels into existence. Think about the Great Migration, where millions of African Americans moved from the rural South to northern cities like Chicago. Just picture the environment for a second. You simply couldn't play a quiet acoustic guitar in a bustling, crowded Chicago club and expect to be heard over the noise. The music had to get louder. As the environment changed, the music adapted, and therefore, the labels applied to it absolutely had to evolve.
Now for Section 4, gatekeepers and authentic blues.
So a gatekeeper is basically someone who holds the keys. They control access to a market. And based on compiled oral histories from Chicago musicians, executives at prominent blues labels really weaponize this power.
They enforced this highly rigid idea of what authentic blues was supposedly meant to sound like, which was usually demanding that traditional 1950s acoustic style. They entirely ignored the natural, evolving nature of the music because, well, they were totally obsessed with what they believed their specific consumer base wanted to buy. To really understand this dynamic, we can look directly at the sources. Bruce Iglauer, who founded Alligator Records, explicitly stated that he was marketing to a white audience. He also expressed some very specific views regarding the business acumen and personal struggles of African American artists. And regardless of how you feel about it, this quote really lays bare how the personal views of gatekeepers and just raw market incentives dictated exactly who was signed, recorded, and promoted under the banner of blues. But the oral histories also capture some really powerful rebuttals from the artists themselves. For instance, veteran musician Billy Branch argued passionately that Black artists actually possessed immense business sense. He pointed out that they were maintaining active international touring schedules and successfully collaborating across modern genres, like hip-hop. Branch's perspective pushes back hard against the narrative established by the record labels, and it reveals a deep, systemic frustration with exactly how musicians were being categorized and judged. So what we ultimately have here is a massive clash of perspectives. On one side, you have gatekeeper authenticity. Executives basically trying to freeze the music in time, keeping it stagnant like some 1960s acoustic folk blues museum exhibit. But on the other side, you have artist evolution. The creators themselves view their music as a living, breathing, improvisational art form that was meant to blend with soul, rock, gospel, and funk. The labels wanted a fixed, marketable product, while the artists, they just wanted to innovate.
Which brings us to our final section. Section 5, the cost of categorization.
This rigid categorization didn't just cause confusion, it had severe financial and cultural consequences. Because the labels often underpaid them, these artists were forced to rely on grueling touring schedules just to survive. The sources also highlight something called Elvis Presley syndrome, where the industry catered so heavily to white audiences who predominantly wanted to see white artists performing the music. This effectively pushed veteran Black artists right out of major festival headlining spots and, tragically, contributed to the erasure of the music's modern natural evolution in the public eye.
To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. When a musical label, whether that's a genre category or a powerful record executive, forces an artist to stay in the past just to meet a specific expectation of authenticity, are they preserving history? Or are they actively preventing the future? It's absolutely a crucial question to ask the next time you look at how we categorize art, and more importantly, the human beings who actually make it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the labels around you.